Just Imagine, a podcast series by Imagine Theatre.
Hello again, welcome to episode 116 of Imagine Theatre's podcast series, and the next in our occasional series looking at the stock pantomime characters. This time, the baddie.
For more information, go to their website at www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.
In the last episode, we were at the North Wall Arts Centre in Oxford, joining pantomime producers, directors, performers, theatre venue staff and educators for the second pantomime panel event to discuss pantomime script writing. If you missed it, you can still check it out along with all of the other previous episodes, and don't forget to subscribe to the series so that you don't miss out in the future. This time, for the second in our occasional series, we're going to take a look at another stock pantomime character, the baddie. And joining me are two of the best in the business, resident baddie and dame at the Imagine Theatre Pantos in Coventry, Andy Hockley.
Good morning.
And the fabulous Divina de Campo, who's left the dark side this Christmas and will be playing the Enchantress for Imagine in Hertford. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you, yes.
So let's talk about something close to both your hearts, although you both play many other characters as well. Andy, first of all, how much do you know about the history of the baddie or the panto villain?
Well, I know it goes back to Commedia dell'arte, as does most of the stuff that panto is rooted in. And I believe that the sort of baddie characters in Commedia dell'arte tended to be the heroine's father or something like that always tried to be horrible and put a kibosh on the romance of the two lead characters. Other than that, I suppose the baddie characters have just developed over the years in fairy tales because every fairy tale needs a villain. You know, you've got to have the dark side to counterbalance the light side, if you like.
Yeah, and likewise in panto, Divina, that is key. That's a key element, isn't it? It's good against evil, good triumphing over evil. So how much did you know before you played a panto villain about how the character evolved?
I try and read as much as I can about each character before I take them on. So, you know, watching other people's interpretations and seeing how they've approached it. You know, just so that I'm not coming in completely unaware of who this character is supposed to be.
The baddie, as quite rightly Andy pointed out, really sort of came to prominence in the late Middle Ages through Commedia dell'arte, and traditionally a demon king. Interestingly, the demon king character still continues in Mother Goose. But obviously it's evolved over time. Do you remember seeing panto as a child, Divina? And if you did, do you remember who the baddies were and how they might have influenced you?
I remember seeing panto, but I don't remember the baddie necessarily in the panto. I was always just obsessed with the Wizard of Oz. So it was the Wicked Witch. Like I was always obsessed with the Wicked Witch from the Wizard of Oz. I just thought she was the most... Isn't this terrible as a 4-year-old that you that you love the Wicked Witch? But she was the one who I was like, oh, she's brilliant. You know, she's so evil. And the way that Margaret Hamilton plays her, she really is. She's wicked. She really is wicked. You know, there's no two ways about it. She's terrifying, and she sort of revels in the evil of her character. So that's, you know, in terms of those characters, that's what I'd always kind of enjoyed because it's, you know, pretend. And Margaret Hamilton there's an interview with her on American TV, and she's really clear about it. You know, she's such a sweet person in real life, and she talks about how, you know, this is all just pretend, and because it's pretend, we're allowed to be extra mean and extra horrible, and, you know, all of that stuff. And that's what it always attracted me, because I'm not really like that.
Andy, what about you? When you saw panto as a child, do you remember the baddie and whoever played the baddie at that time, how they might have influenced your portrayal?
Funnily enough, the first baddie I ever saw in panto is one that I've never played, but would love to play. And that's Captain Hook in Peter Pan in, I think it was over in Bristol. And I cannot remember for the life of me who the actor was that played in the back of my mind, I've got Ronald Pickup, although I'm not quite sure if it was him. I know for certain Sylvia Sims played Peter Pan, so that's how long ago it was. So he would have been in the 60s. And later on, I used to go every year to the New Theatre in Cardiff. My parents used to take me down there when Wyn Calvin was the very famous dame down there. And my memory of the one baddie I remember was Abanazar. And I think the reason that Abanazar sticks out in my memory is because out of the stock Panto Baddies, he is probably the most evil of the lot, apart from the Demon King in Mother Goose. And, the clue is in the name Demon, that, he's got to be very bad. But Abanazar's the sort of, because he's got magic abilities himself, and he's got a real quest to get that lamp and to be in control of that genie. I remember that portrayal of Abanazar quite sharply, because it was the first time I'd seen Aladdin. And so it was the first time I'd seen a sort of fantasy villain, if you like, because I always looked on Captain Hook as a sort of real person. He was a real pirate. I had made that differentiation in my head at that age.
Yeah, I think you're right about Abanazar. Some of the other baddies are almost cartoon baddies, aren't they? That there's some comedy with, but Abanazar is very dark. I worked many, many years ago with the late great Alfred Marks as Abanazar, who was absolutely terrific. And talking of the darkness of the character, Divina, do you have any idea why the baddie always seems to arrive on stage from stage left? Because that's a tradition that's been long running. It isn't always kept to these days, but do you have any idea why that might be?
I actually have no idea at all. I don't know whether it's something to do with, if you spill salt, you throw it over your left-hand side because the devil's on your left-hand shoulder. But there must be something to do with the left-hand side being evil, which is terrible, isn't it, for all those left-handies?
Yeah, well, you're actually on the way, Andy. Can you add any more to that?
No, and I'm terrible because you told me this last time we spoke.
It symbolizes the devil, and it's traditionally associated with the left-hand side of the stage, again, from Commedia dell'arte through the Middle Ages, because in Italian, left is sinistra, which is the dark side of the stage. And the good fairy, or maybe the enchantress this Christmas in Hertford, will arrive from stage right. And so that tradition continues. And it also has been a key part of other forms of theatre, mystery plays, medieval mystery plays, for instance. That was always the case, where the baddie was often, sometimes King Herod, for instance, was seen as a baddie, with that sort of Christian link to theatre at that time. But that's a tradition that I would certainly like to see maintained. And are you a traditionalist?
Absolutely, yeah. And Ian has always kept to that. The left-hand side of the theatre is always the baddie's entrance and exits. And we're very lucky at the Belgrade because we've got those two great vom areas, so you can really make a feature of them as well there, design-wise,
And Davina, in terms of that, I mean, it's often depicted in the set designs as well. So many people might think the phrase "the dark side" actually comes from Star Wars, but actually, there's always been a dark side of the stage in Panto for that very reason. Do you think the audiences get it though? I mean, it is a distinctive way of pointing out the difference in the characters, though, isn't it? Having the baddie arrive stage left and the goodie stage right.
Yeah, absolutely. And it allows the audience the space as well. I think that's one of the kind of important things about it, is that it allows the audience the space to, hear the voice and go, oh, I know where this person will be, rather than, having to struggle and search for them on the stage. You know where they're coming from already, which you kind of know that as well in terms of their motives. You know where they're coming from. You know that they're the baddie and they have this evil intention. So then knowing where they're actually coming from physically as well, it's that proxemics thing, isn't it, about how far or close somebody is from everybody else on the stage that displays their relationship. It's that sort of idea that it allows you as an audience to kind of relax as well into, I understand the format of this theatrical convention, and so I'm able to follow it much more easily.
Yeah, and Andy, Panto is so good at signposting, which is really important for young children in the audience, isn't it? So
Yeah.
that signposting can be, this is a baddie because they're on that side of the stage, but also in terms of what the costume is like, the baddie's costume would be darker and less colourful. And even the play on, Andy, is a key to what's going to happen next. The baddie's play on is key.
It is. It is. And it helps. The Belgrade over the years has been quite pioneering in accessibility for all sorts of audiences across the board. And one of the things that we do when we do touch tours and things for the partially sighted is every character that comes on stage to introduce themselves, because we do like a little pre-touch tour before the show. Like you say, that is very key, because each character gets their own little motif from the MD sat in the pit. They'll just play a little snatch of something on the piano. And so they can key in straight away as to who is who. So when they hear that intro during the show, they know exactly who's coming on. And in the baddie's case, it is very, very important.
And most people in an audience, Divina, have no idea all this is going on. They think Panto is organised chaos, but that signposting, and that also would include the baddie's song, is a key element, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But that's, the joy of it, isn't it? That these conventions create a framework in order for people to have accessible theatre. If it's not Chekhov or Dostoevsky, we're not doing something which is super complicated, and you have to, be operating at a high level of understanding of drama before you really understand what's going on. This is something which is accessible to everybody purely because it's been set up that way. It's been made in a way so that whatever level of understanding of theatre you're coming at, you're going to be able to understand what's going on. And the format of the thing itself does that for you without you realizing.
Andy, the three characters that I think have the most or possibly all the interaction with the audience are the dame, the comic, and the baddie.
Yeah.
You've played all three, I think. So the interaction with the baddie and the audience is obviously very different to the other two, but nevertheless key.
It is, and it depends on the way it's written and the director's vision of what role he wants the baddie to play in that particular show. I'm a firm believer, I've got the traditional view that really the two characters that can break the fourth wall whenever they want to are the dame and the comic. But I think there are many cases where, depending on what kind of baddie you're playing, like for instance, due to cast restrictions on Dick Whittington, where the director couldn't have the full amount of people that he wanted to fill all the roles. When I played King Rat, and I'd done it previously, I had two sidekicks called Scratch and Sniff. This last time that I did it, we could only afford a Scratch. We couldn't afford a Sniff. I became, that sounded terrible, didn't it? But you know what I mean. So my role as King Rat was to be primarily the baddie and the hissable villain, but also I had to be available to be a sort of sidekick to Scratch. Otherwise, Scratch would have been completely on their own. So it sort of, it kind of changed the dynamic. And I quite like that sort of villain because it means that you can form a bond with the audience. And I think it makes your job being bad easier if they also like you a little bit.
There is a difference, isn't there, between certain baddies, and some baddies can have sidekicks, as you mentioned with King Rat, and also the Wicked Queen maybe might have the sidekick that takes Snow White out into the forest, or I mean, Flesh Creek could be described as the giant's sidekick in many ways. Davina, what do you love about playing a baddie?
It is that ability to just step out of who you really are and and revel in that. I also think that quite often the baddies are the most interesting characters because there has to be a reason that they're bad. And you, as the actor, as the performer, you have to discover what that character's reason for being bad is, whether that's already built into the script or whether that's little signposts that are given you of they've ended up this way because of X, Y, and Z, So I find them almost always the most interesting characters because there's always a lot of layers going on underneath them as to why they're bad and why they're acting out in the way that they are. I always try and approach whoever I'm playing on stage as if they are a real person, nobody is born wicked, they end up becoming that way because of external forces a lot of the time, unless of course you're the demon king, and then of course you're the demon king.
Do you know the other distinctive between the baddie and the Damon the comic in terms of interaction with the audience is that very often the baddie is a whole lot more involved in the narrative and a key part of the narrative, whereas the Damon the comic generally aren't that involved in the narrative. They're taken along by the story. They don't drive it on.
Yeah, I think especially in Panto, that there are a number of characters in each script that have to be an anchor, and they're the people who are, you're not allowed to step out. You have to be there all the time as that character, and that's almost always the princess or the prince, and then the baddie generally has to be exactly that. You can't step out of it and be like nudge nudge wink wink. There's still potential for comedy in there, but that character has to stay in that role, otherwise you break the show. You break the show. You stop the kids and the parents and anybody else who's in the audience being able to suspend disbelief. There has to be those people on stage who are actually in that world, and I think a lot of the time that's what the baddie is. They're the anchor and they're driving forwards the story.
Yeah, and the key part of the interaction for the baddie is to incite the audience to boo and to get involved, and that might mean more interaction depending on how good the audience is.
I think the more vitriol you get from the audience, the more they want to shout at you and boo you, then you're doing a good job. You've cracked it. It's not easy, especially on a 10:15 in the morning school show when you've got 800 kids that will scream at you for absolutely no reason other than they know you're the villain, and that's it. So half the script goes out of the window on those shows because it's just not worth saying it because you can't be heard.
You said you've never played Captain Hook, but a lot of the baddies that you have played have subtle differences sometimes, but can be very different in other times. And the other one we haven't really talked about, which you've also played, is one of the sisters in Cinderella, because that's a really difficult and totally different dynamic, isn't it?
Well, that's a perfect example of what I just said about it being easy to play the villainy if the audience like you a little bit. And I know we've spoken about this before, Martin, but Cinderella, the sisters in Cinderella are quite lucky in that they have that one scene where they force Cinderella to tear up her invitation to the ball, which everybody at that point then hates you for real. But it's by the time you get to the ball and they come in their ridiculous ball gowns, all that's forgotten. So there's key moments, and I think that's true of quite a lot of the Panto villains. There's key moments in the story that you have to play for real, that you are badder than bad. And then the rest of the story allows you to breathe a bit more and be liked a bit more. Because if the audience like you as a character, I think it's easier for them to buy into the villainy that you're portraying.
Do you know, there's a real dark side to all this as well, Divina, isn't there? Because and the dark origins of pantomime all come from the bloodthirsty fairy tales, and the Grimm brothers particularly are really, really dark. All the disguises, the transformation, the evil man who tells you he's your uncle, and all that sort of stuff. But one of the key elements is that children love pantomime, but generally speaking, we all go on white knuckle rides at theme parks and do things because we enjoy being scared as well, don't we?
Absolutely. It's that old thing about, life is pain. We like to be scared. We like to feel those things because that's part of our natural instinct. And so that's what theatre does. It creates a safe space, just like hopefully a theme park ride is also a safe space to feel scared. It gives us a framework in order to allow ourselves to feel those things without actually being in danger. It's a very different sensation, I think, the fear that you feel in a theatre to the fear that you feel in, a real life dangerous situation. One of them is enjoyable and the other is not.
So, Davina, tell us about your baddie, how choose the characterization, and actually, is there a baddie that you'd love to play that you haven't yet, and it might be from The Wizard of Oz, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many wonderful roles that I'd love to sink my teeth into. But like I said, I always try and start with the script with everything and anything that I ever do. I try and start with the script, and I look at what does this person say, and then who are they saying it to? Why are they saying it? What is their reasoning for it? There's always a reason why somebody's doing what they're doing, and your job as the performer and actor is to work out what that reason is, and then make that as clear as you possibly can to an audience. So, for instance, for the Wicked Queen, the way that she behaves is primarily it's driven through fear, fear of losing control and standing and not being liked. The only thing that she's ever sort of felt that she's had is her beauty, and that is being threatened by somebody else who then is also, in line for the throne and can depose her and remove her standing in society. So it's all driven through fear, which once you understand that, it helps you to humanize that character and do exactly like Andy says, create those little gaps where the audience can like you as well as hate you. It does make for a much better performance that way. If you're just purely evil, it's very difficult for an audience to get on board with you when you're on stage.
Talking of the Wicked Queen, I had the pleasure of working with Sherry Hewson in Snow White a few years ago, and she told me about her baddie.
Yeah. I'm Paul O'Grady in a dress. So my baddie is always quite camp, although I am horrible to the children because they have to boo me. So when I come down at the end for the curtain call, they're not quite sure whether to boo or clap. But I love baddies. I don't like playing, lovely people because it's not fun really. But being baddie, especially in a pantomime, because it's tongue in cheek. You can be evil in a camp, outrageous kind of way, and I've always played baddies like that. So I really enjoy it.
Are you looking forward to playing the Enchantress this year, though, and leaving the dark side behind, Divina?
Well, she's not just good, though. That's the fun thing about the Enchantress is she's a bit naughty as well. She doesn't do a very nice thing to the prince, does she? She turns him into a beast. So she has her own agenda going on, which is, in the grand scheme of things, is a good thing. But she's doing something which isn't very nice to teach someone a lesson in order to reach a better conclusion. But the way that she goes about it isn't particularly nice. I mean, she could just say, hey, maybe treat people nicely, and that'd be a better way to be a prince. But instead she turns him into a monster to teach him a lesson. So she's also a really interesting character to play because she isn't, just one thing or another. She's that kind of grey area in between. Is she good? Is she actually good, or is she actually bad? Or is she just, like all of us, a multitude of good and bad all in one body?
And Andy, we've talked about on the podcast series in the past, the fact that pantomime is evolving. Some of the elements are changing. Some of the traditions are disappearing because society and society's values are changing. But I think the future for the baddie is never in question, surely, because it's a fundamental part of Panto, as we said at the very beginning, that good over evil battle.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I think that the future for the baddie is quite rosy. I'm going to have an interesting Christmas because I'm delving into something that I've not really done much of before, is that I'm playing the baddie sidekick this year, because with it being Sleeping Beauty, they wouldn't allow me to be Caraboss, which I'm steaming about because I bet Divina's done that one. So, yeah, I'm quite looking forward to being Caraboss's grumpy little sidekick.
Yeah, that's a different challenge as well, doesn't it? Rather like when you're playing one of the stepsisters, because you have to build up a rapport very quickly with somebody you may never have worked with before.
Yes, and you've got to do it really fast, like on the first day of rehearsals, basically, because you've got to spend the rest of the time learning it and being able to do it without falling over, which is a challenge in itself these days. I think definitely the baddie's role within pantomime will never change. It'll develop. There'll always be the baddie taboo. You have to.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think you'll both do a fabulous job, whatever you play in the future. But for this Christmas in Hertford, it's going to be an incredible year for Divina, and back at the Belgrade in Coventry, another fabulous Christmas for the audiences there that just keep growing and growing every year. It's been fascinating talking to both of you. Goodies in real life, baddies on stage. Andy Hockley and Divina de Campo, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And that's it for now. Don't forget to subscribe through your favourite podcast app and spread the word to anybody you know who loves pantomime. Next time, we're going to chat to a singer, comedian, impressionist, actress and pantomime veteran, Hilary O'Neill. So make sure you join me, Martin Ballard, next time for episode 117.
Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Just Imagine, the podcast series from Imagine Theatre. And you can find out more by going to www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.